Hello and welcome to the first episode of Learning D&D. This series is going to take someone who knows absolutely nothing about D&D and give them all the information they need to start playing. Make sure you see the rest of the videos, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be posting one a week, and if you're viewing this in the future they should already be out, so go across to my channel and check out the rest of the series. This first episode is going to be starting right from the beginning, as we're going to be talking about what actually is Dungeons & Dragons and what to expect when you sit at a table to play. If you've looked into Dungeons & Dragons in the past, you've probably heard some sort of description like D&D is a collaborative storytelling experience where one player takes the role of the Dungeon Master and the rest of them play characters. The Dungeon Master will then weave a story that the characters go ahead and interact with. And a description like that is absolutely true, but I don't think it's really detailed enough to let someone who knows absolutely nothing about Dungeons & Dragons know what to expect when they sit at the table for the first time to play the game. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. We're going to be going into detail about what to expect session on session when you sit down to play this game. Before we get onto that, I just want to let you know that I do upload D&D content here on YouTube twice a week, so make sure to subscribe if you want to increase your knowledge in D&D. And I also stream over on Twitch regularly, so make sure to go and give me a follow there if you want to come and have a chat or ask any questions about the game. Right, so let's start right from the beginning. A D&D group can be anywhere between 2 people to 10 people. Most people would agree that the ideal amount is between 4 and 7 players though. Out of the players, one person will be designated as the Dungeon Master, and then the rest of the players will all play a character each. The Dungeon Master will then create and control the story, while the other players will all create and control an individual character within the world and within the story. I like to explain it in terms of a movie, so the Dungeon Master is like the director and writer in one, whereas the rest of the players are like the actors all playing one character. The biggest difference is that the players who are playing one character can do whatever they want with that character, so rather than reading off a script, they decide what their character does in the story. And then there's also the other pretty big difference that it's imaginary, all in your head, and you're actually just sat around the table rather than physically acting. So as a player, before the first session even starts, you will have created a character, and as a DM, before the first session starts, you will have decided the story and set some things in place to start it. We're going to go through creating a character in episode 2 and 3 of the story, so make sure to subscribe so that you see those episodes. Now we've got all of that out of the way, let's actually talk about what you do when you play Dungeons & Dragons. So as we've said, as a player you will have made a character, and that involves also making a character sheet, which determines how good you are at various tasks and what your character can do. You don't have to worry about that now, we're going to be going into that in a future episode, but it's something you've got to understand what Dungeons & Dragons is and what you're going to be doing at the table. While you're sat at the table and you understand your character and you've got your character sheet, the Dungeon Master is then going to describe a scene and set up a scenario. The players then explain how their character would interact with the scene and with the scenario, and that's pretty much Dungeons & Dragons. Let me give you an example so you can understand it a little bit better. So the Dungeon Master might start by saying something like, "You have been walking through the woodland for 3 days, and the rain still hasn't let up. Mirrored puddles spread themselves across the dirt track, and other than the occasional sound of wildlife, you haven't been able to hear much else over the heavy rain. Something different does catch your attention on this day, because just off of the dirt track, you see a dead body face down in the dirt. What would you like to do?" And then as a player, you would decide what your character would do in that situation. So in this example, you could go and inspect the body, you could completely ignore it and just walk straight past it, or maybe you want to check the surrounds to see if something dangerous is still nearby. Once you explain what your character is going to do in the scenario, the DM will then continue to describe and explain what happens next. So to carry on the example, let's say you decide your character is going to go up to the body and try to examine it to find out the cause of death. The DM might then say, as you turn over the body, you notice that in its right hand is a crumpled up note, slightly dampened by the rain. Once again, you will then say how your character reacts to that situation, and you just keep going like that. That really is the real basics of Dungeons & Dragons. There is of course more than that. There are 3 core rulebooks that you don't have to worry about at the moment. In this series we'll be going through everything that you need to know. Another really big aspect of Dungeons & Dragons is the dice. You see, when a Dungeon Master explains the scenario and you say how your character is going to react, it isn't set in stone that you're going to succeed. So let's go back to the example. Let's say that you've taken the note, you've read it, and you've decided you still want to try to determine how this person has died. The DM might ask you to make a medicine skill check. You don't have to understand what that means now, we'll be going into that in a later episode, but as we explained earlier, you'll have a character sheet that tells you how good your character is in certain things, and one of the areas is medicine. So let's say your character is pretty good at medicine and they have a +4 to their medicine check. That means when the Dungeon Master asks you to make a medicine check, you roll a 20-sided dice and you +4 to it, and then tell the Dungeon Master the outcome. This will determine what bit of information that the Dungeon Master gives you next, and depending how high or how low you roll depends what type of information you'll get. So if you had rolled high, the Dungeon Master might say, you can tell by the claw and bite marks that this person definitely died after being attacked by multiple wolves. If you rolled really high, they might also add, and you can tell that this definitely happened within the last hour. If you rolled lower, the Dungeon Master might say something like, you know that they were attacked by an animal, but you can't determine when or what type of animal. And if you rolled really low, the Dungeon Master might say, you have no idea, there's slash marks and you don't really understand what happened here. This aspect of chance is a big part of Dungeons & Dragons, and it comes up throughout the game. Don't be fooled into thinking that failure is bad, though a lot of the most memorable moments in Dungeons & Dragons have come from a bad dice roll, causing something epic to happen, or maybe even just some silly moments. So let's summarise what we have learnt so far. There is one Dungeon Master whose main role is to drive the story forwards, and then there are multiple players that are all in charge of one character. Each player has a character sheet that determines how good or bad their character is at certain skills, as well as what other features they might have. The Dungeon Master will then describe a scene and explain a scenario, and the players will explain how their characters deal with that scenario. This will then progress the story, and dice are used to add an aspect of chance into failure and success of certain tasks the characters want to do. Perfect, so let's now touch on roleplay and where that comes into Dungeons & Dragons. It generally isn't as black and white as this, but to keep it simple, I'm going to say there are two types of groups when it comes to roleplaying. In the first group, the Dungeon Master and the players will actually act as their characters when they're roleplaying within the game, whereas the second group, they will just say what their character does. To give you an example of what I mean here, let's say that the characters have just gone into town and they've gone into a general store to buy some items. A player from the first group might say something like this. I walk into the shop and say to the store owner, "Hello there, sir. I'm looking for some rope, round about 50 foot, and I'm hoping you can help me." The Dungeon Master might then reply something like this. "Of course I can, friend. 50 foot of rope is going for 1 gold at the moment. Special price just for today." Whereas with the second group, the exact same scenario might just go a bit like this. The player would say something like, "I want to go into the shop and ask for some rope from the storekeeper." And the Dungeon Master will go, "Okay, yep, that's 1 gold." It's as simple as that. Both are role-playing, they're just two different ways of doing it. Why I said before this that it's not as black and white as I'm about to explain is because there is an in-between there. There's different levels of character acting that each group will do. Some will stay in character for the whole session, whereas some don't really do as much character acting at all. And there are tons of groups out there looking for players, so you can definitely find yourself a group that does the right amount for you. Hopefully you're getting a good idea of what Dungeons & Dragons is now and what to expect when you actually sit at the table. So let's round up this video by talking about the story aspect of the game. Throughout the video I've been given some examples of what type of scenarios might happen in your game, but to show you how the overall story might come about, let's go back to the first example where you found a dead body with a note in their hands in the middle of the woods. So let's say you read that note and it's actually a map to a lost artifact. You end up going where the map takes you and you end up finding a lost cave, but another faction has got there before you. And after observing them from a distance, you realise they don't seem like they're a very nice group. So you decide you're going to try and sneak in there and get the artifact before they can, but you end up failing. The evil group gets the artifact and gets away, and while you're leaving the area, the local authorities turn up to see what's been going on here. You explain to them what's happened and that this group have taken it and gone away, and they end up hiring you to go after the group and try work out what they're doing and get the artifact back. You end up deciding doing a bit of research in the library about the artifacts before you go and hunt them down, and you find out that there's actually 5 artifacts that if put together can do some world ending stuff. So you decide rather than going and hunting them down directly, you'll go and try to find the second artifact. So you do some research and find out where that is located. You get there first this time and manage to get the artifact before this evil group that seems to be getting them all. But a few weeks later, you get attacked by the group as they try to take the artifact from you. You manage to fend them off and decide you're going to go to an archmage to find out what is going on with these artifacts. It explains that if you get all 5 of the artifacts, you can do a ritual that will raise one of the demon lords, which is a world-ending event. You then spend the rest of the campaign trying to get the unclaimed artifacts, as well as trying to get the artifacts off of this evil group. Hopefully by using this example you can see how just the little story threads that was put at the beginning can end up turning into a big epic story. What is even more exciting about Dungeons & Dragons is that the characters will make some sort of backstory when they create their character that will place them in the world. The Dungeon Master can then use that backstory as a tool in the overarching story. So using the same example, maybe you had decided that your character never knew their father. The Dungeon Master could decide that actually your father is a high up ranking person in this evil group. And at some point in the story there's going to be a point where you and your father have to fight to try to get one of the artifacts. Because it is a part of your backstory and you feel like you created that, it feels so much better than just playing in a story that maybe you don't care about so much. And that is one of the reasons why so many people love Dungeons & Dragons. It is a great creative outlet, not just for the Dungeon Master, but also for the players. So there you have it, that is Dungeons & Dragons in its basic form. In episode 2 we're going to be starting creating a character, so make sure to subscribe so you can see that. If you did find this video useful, please do give it a like, it helps me to grow this channel, and if you have any questions at all, go and put them down in the comments or head over to my Twitch channel and I can answer them live there. But until next time, happy gaming.